Hello and welcome to today's episode of The Unmentionables. I'm your host, Connor, and joining me on the line all the way from sunny Phoenix, Arizona is my good friend, Dan. Dan, the microphone working now?
Yeah, I think we're all set. It only took 24 hours.
Yeah, do you think we're getting old?
Are we getting old? Well,
we tried to record yesterday and spent, a better part of an hour and a half trying to get your microphone to work. Couldn't get it going, so you went to Best Buy yesterday, bought a new microphone, and plug it in only to find out that your old microphone was working just fine.
Yep, just fine. Logged in, and whatever input setting thing had it hooked up to the Bose headphones just fine.
Yeah, give it another 20 years and we're not even going to understand any of it. It's a good thing we have your wife, right?
Seriously, she's my IT expert. Everything that I do.
Yeah, actually, you should probably just put her on speed dial for future episodes.
100%.
Because there's no way this doesn't happen again, right?
Hopefully, but you're probably right.
Speaking of kind of, generational boomer humor, I was working the other night and I kind of got cornered into a conversation with a older bar patron, and he was just absolutely roasting his grandson, who's kind of Gen Z. Me being right on the cusp, I kind of wanted to make a debate out of it, but since I was on the clock, I kind of just turned on the NPC bartender mode and just kind of agreed with whatever he said or was very passive, but it got me thinking. I was like, why not turn this into some juicy content? And I couldn't think of anybody better to talk to about it than you. As you're very similar to me, we're both technically millennials, but you kind of have maybe a different viewpoint.
Yeah, I think so. Born in 1990, kind of right at the end of the Cold War, beginning of this new, I don't know, we call it a generation, but almost a new world entirely. The development of the internet coming around, and when you look back on what the world looked like in 1990, it's so unrecognizable from anything that we've seen before in history that, I don't know, it's different, that's for sure. And navigating it as, kind of a youth and then an adolescent, young father, young adult, and now kind of getting into my, I guess they would call it a middle-aged years. It's been quite the journey.
Well, and I think the biggest difference between you and I, we think very similar and we have a lot of similar ideas, but just the way we live our lives is very different. Like, you are a father and you're kind of trying to do this like kind of nuclear family, a little bit different. Whereas me, like, I try to avoid responsibility like it's the plague. And maybe that goes into kind of more of the different characteristics of when we were born. But I wanted to start with Gen Z just because I feel like they're getting, kind of the most flack right now.
Absolutely.
And I'm actually a world-renowned Gen Z supporter. You work with a lot of Gen Z, don't you? Or at least like you used to manage a lot of them?
Yeah, before I took over this sales position that's kind of an outside solo position, my staff was entirely Gen Z. I managed anywhere from 6 to 8 of them at any given time, including position as assistant store manager that was held by somebody who was as young as 23 years old. So finding a way to, I don't even know if understands is the right word, but just somehow connect with them and find a way to work with them to achieve these goals that ultimately, like looking at it through their lens, they kind of viewed it as all frivolous. Like, and that's just something that, even when I started working when I was, 14, 15 years old, and I started working at the local Kroger in my tiny little mountain town in Colorado, there was always, this idea of we got to do what's best for the company. That's even as a part-time, bagger, that was, very important and part of the mantra. And, you want to fast forward 15 years later, and man, I feel like most of the workforce out there in America right now could not care less about the company.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and I think that's one of the, the big things about Gen Z is that they challenge every idea. They challenge the status quo. I don't think that respect is given. You and I were both raised where, you give respect to your elders. They're smarter than you, they're
100%.
wise, they know everything, you
Yep.
know nothing. And Gen Z, they threw all that out the window and they say, no, I think that, the older people, they say really good things, but look at the way they live their lives. I don't want to live my life
Right.
like that. And I think that's like the start of really where Gen Z takes on this different path. They're only wanting to they're only wanting this like meaningful work and motivations from within, and they're not willing to put that aside for the good of anybody.
They're not willing to put that aside for the good of a entity that they don't believe in, right? So I work for a large business to business retail company. That doesn't provide a lot of our part time and even our full time, like front end workers, with a whole lot of job satisfaction as far as it being a fulfilling job. Um, Now, that being said, they still come in, they work, they do exactly what's asked for them or what's asked of them, and not a lick more. Right? They're never going to go above and beyond. That's not something that they like to do. And I don't know, just kind of wheel that back. We were talking about the respect thing. To get ready for this, I did a little bit of research. I know that there's always these characteristics that define these different generations. So I went to the Stanford report, and one of their research on arts and humanities, specifically looked into the characteristics of Gen Z, and one of the ones that came up the most was this idea that they're very pragmatic, where they require, like we said, prove it. Show me you're worthy of my respect. Show me that you have, facts backing up what you're saying. I don't want to hear about this, uh, this idea where, oh, if I do this, I might get this one day. Like, that's not enough for them anymore. And I think that's one of the greatest things about them.
Imagine being a boomer or a Gen X and like being raised where that is not something that you're allowed to ever think, like that's blasphemous. Like imagine some old person telling you, hey, you need to do this, this, and that, and them saying why? Like why I don't need to do that. Tell me why I need to do that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how many times did you hear as a kid where it was, you're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and you go, parents say, "Hey, do this." You're like, "Why?" "Oh, because I told you." Like,
Yes, yes, yes.
and that was the end of it. Good luck with the Gen Z. I asked my daughter to clean up her room, and we got to have a 30-minute discussion about why it is healthy to have a clean living space, how that benefits, her, how it helps with her, mental ability to process the things happening around her. I mean, and this is with a freaking 10-year-old. I want my kids to grow up in a setting where, they had those things that I kind of feel like our parents missed out on as far as raising us. And I feel like there's a status quo as far as how parenting was done for so long, just because of the I don't know, the facts of the day, right? Not a whole lot of time to sit and ponder why it's important to have a clean room. When you're 6, 7 years old in the '90s, because there's too much else going on, and now it's like, well, we can have those conversations with those kids because it is important to them.
So outside of the workplace, one thing I really love about Gen Z and something that I really try to be more like is this sense of vulnerability that they have.
Right.
Again, I think that the older generations really dislike this level of vulnerability, this, for lack of a better term, softness that they exhibit. But what I kind of look at is, man, this sense of empathy, this sense of care and transparency that they have, as well as this like sense of inclusiveness, where they have this preference for authenticity and individuality. All of these things just wrap into, I think, a really big strength. Where it's like, how can I say anything about your belittle you when you know who you are and you show that to the world? Like, hey, this is who I am, and like take it or leave it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a good point too. It's just it makes you bulletproof to an extent where I'm sure they have, everybody does these insecurities that they're worried about but when you present yourself as that authentic, what is somebody going to do to try to upset you or hurt you? I mean, disagree with you maybe, but I also feel like it's another big, portion of what Gen Z does. If somebody disagrees with them, they just kind of shrug it off and move on. They're not going to waste time with you. If
Yeah.
you come at them with this crazy line of "this is what I believe, this is how I am," they're just going to shrug, and I mean, most of the time, literally just walk away, just be like, "I'm good."
And they also expect that out of you and out of the
Yes.
people they interact with, which I mean, that just kind of forces me to, I don't know, be a better person. I crave these friendships. I crave these relationships with people who have those strengths and have this like bulletproofness, because I was a very insecure child, and even going into my early 20s, just really had a hard time coming to terms with who I am and what my strengths and weaknesses are. Being able to kind of accept who I am and also be willing to share with others, hey, I am this way because of these things, and this is who I am, and I think that I'm a good person and I try to be a good person. Um, them kind of forcing that out of me is something that I am forever grateful for.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. As you're kind of saying those things, I'm thinking back to my millennial friends, people I've known, getting on 20 years at this point. Um, and just how long it took for us to be in a space where we felt comfortable and okay having those conversations. And then these Gen Z, friends that we have, it's like we've already had those conversations, and I've known them a decade plus less than than my millennial friends. And I mean, there's even some of them where I feel like, hey, I have a better idea, a better understanding of what's going on in your head and how you feel about things than I do some of friends that I've had a lot longer, people I consider very, very close friends.
Well, I mean, and it's never the small talk with them either. I call my sister.
Yeah.
It's never like, hey, how's it going? It's like, hey, so like, how's your mental health? I know da 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 with the world is going on, and I just want to make sure that you're approaching your trauma and you're creating these boundaries and doing all of these things. And I'm just like overwhelmed with it. It's like where did they
Yup.
get this wisdom?
Well, I think, yeah, I agree. I agree. It's, you look at, the baby boomers and the Gen X, and, like we were just saying, the millennials, it took decades to develop an environment where you were comfortable enough with somebody to have even those conversations kind of on the surface level. I mean, all you got to do is think about how taboo it was 15 years ago to be seeing a therapist, for Christ's sake. Now, everybody I know has a therapist. We all talk about like why we're going to therapy. What we're discussing strategies like we're trading Pokemon cards. Like, hey, have you tried this? Like my guy said this. It's like,
Yeah.
and I don't know.
Uh,
I guess as to where that wisdom came from, I think that this infinite technology, infinite amount of technology, infinite amount of information available to the Gen Z. You know, that's where it comes from, and that's where the basis of most of what they got going on comes from. To reference that Stanford report one more time, it said that they are the only generation of human beings to never know the world without the internet. So, for the very first time in human history, we have an entire generation of people where the internet's always been there and it's always been refined. Not like the wild, wild west days of the internet in the late 90s and early 2000s, which anybody that grew up, as a preteen or a teen in those ages remembers just how unhinged it got out
just
there.
absolutely.
And,
I mean, we won't go super deep into that, but it was, as you said, a wild,
we don't have
wild. Oh
time.
God, I still think I need to talk to my therapist about 13-year-old Connor discovering Google.
Yes, I mean, I mean, what better way to feel in a credible sense of confidence in oneself, where if I was 8 years old and I asked an adult why is the sky blue, well, what am I going to do? Go to the library and research the answer? No, the sky's blue because of what you know Papa said about it, whatever reason he'd give you. You just took him at his word. He's like, now you just whip out your phone and you have the real, actual answer in what, a fraction of a second. there were better questions to be asked these days than why is the sky blue? Because as a 6 year old, my son's already, researched why is the sky blue. He already looked at that. Why is the grass green? He's already looked at that. He's Googled it, watched a YouTube video on it, whatever, and so those questions are now boring. But when we were kids, those were the only questions we had. So by the time that, these Gen Z is getting to 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, why becomes so much more of a deeper question than just the surface level stuff that we can experience because you have access to so much more.
Yeah, I think that you put that elegantly. And I mean, for me, it's so weird because I was born in '96, which means I'm like in no man's land where, I'm too old to be a Gen Z, but I'm too young to be a millennial. You sent me a thing yesterday saying, yeah, like technically you're a millennial, but you're not quite a '90s kid.
Right.
And so for me, I played sticks and stones in the backyard, throwing things at windows, and hiking mountains and doing all these things outside, playing imaginary with my sisters. I remember in third grade, I was in the English room learning how to do cursive, and then in fourth grade they completely scrapped that room and put a bunch of computers in it. And like that would be like like that, for these kids, like they couldn't even fathom that, like all of a sudden it's just like, hey, you're going to learn how to type and you're never going to use cursive again except for your really crappy like signature that you do once a month. It's something that I'm really happy to have. I think like that's really where I become a millennial is I do know a world before technology. And there's definitely a sense of like, oh, I really miss that world and it was the simpler times and all of yada yada yada. But I really think that for Gen Z, having just this stability of the internet and what they know is the truth, and these questions that you say get to bore them, it's just this foundation of knowledge that is really going to just cascade for their children and their children's children.
Yeah, I mean, it's as much of a step as getting the internet was. There is a generation looming very close that they're not going to know a world before AI, right? So it's like, what does that jump in technology look like? Is it going to be as significant? And I mean, for my money, I think it's going to be even more significant than the jump from no internet to internet. Like from no AI to AI being in every facet of our lives. I think that that's right around the corner. So
yeah, we might have to do a follow-up episode or three-parter or something on that, because I think you and I could talk for hours on AI. And I mean, every week I read some new article and it's like, oh, I need to talk to Dan about that. So I want to transition maybe over to millennials because that's firmly where you sit, and I think that that's half of where I kind of feel as well. So millennials are interesting because they also have access to this technology, but they grew up in the old world, this like pre-technology, raised the boomer way. What do you think is like the contrast to things? Like, what do you think defines like the millennials?
Well, I talk about this with my brother and my mother actually quite a bit. We're very I don't know, progressive and being able to talk about these types of things, I feel like. And we like putting stuff in boxes. We like categorizing things. And we believe, kind of as a family, that it leads to a little bit better understanding of where people are coming from. And so I guess I've kind of narrowed it down to a few traits. One, the millennial generation is one of the grittiest generations of all time. And I don't know if there's going to be any boomers listening to this, but if they are, they just started laughing.
They're like, okay, avocado toast.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, man, don't knock it till you try it. It ain't that bad. Yeah. But when you think about what a person born, and I'm going to use 1990s because it's a super easy reference for me, what somebody born in 1990 has experienced in the first 30 years of life. And, I don't want to disenfranchise what a baby boomer went through or, what the silent generation or the greatest generation went through before us. But, when I was 3 years old, the Berlin Wall fell, right? And then, before the end of that decade, we had Amazon and the internet and Yahoo and Google, and then 9/11, and then the biggest recession since the Great Depression, And then we went through COVID. And it's just, you can sit here and name off a million things, but gritty and resilient is the mindset of the millennial, because if it wasn't, we all would have just dug a hole and went and died in it already. But there is a huge population of millennials that is keeping this country rolling, keeping hope in this country. We talk a lot about just what kind of political landscape there is, and one thing I will always point to is to somebody who's feeling discouraged about the outcomes of this political landscape. Every single election cycle, the average age of Congress, the House of Representatives, the Senate, those things are dropping. There's more young people getting in there, and yes, we're getting older each election cycle, and soon we're going to be the old guys around there. But that kind of leads into the second characteristic, I think a lot, and that would be empathy. So grit and empathy are like the kind of 1-2 punch for millennials, in my opinion. And what I mean, for as far as being empathetic for political reasons, we're okay, unlike the generations before us, with getting into these positions of political power, making the changes that we see fit, and then stepping back. I've talked to a lot of people in my generation that if they were put in that situation, they'd do the best they could, but then they'd get the fuck out. And
Yeah.
we didn't discuss if I should cuss or not. Sorry.
It's okay.
But
It's all good.
We're all about.
Is your 10-year-old daughter going to be listening to us talk about like the politics of the future? Probably.
Probably,
actually,
yeah. But she also knows exactly what it sounds like when I say.
Sure.
There's more out
Yeah.
there than just what we have known, and I think that that's so prevalent in the millennials because for the last 30 years, we thought we knew what was behind door number 2, and then every time we opened it, we got slapped in the face with some other crazy stuff that happened, right? Like September 11th, 2001, I was headed into the 6th grade. I walked up those stairs that I've walked up 5,000 times over the past 4 years ago into that same school. I knew exactly what was going to happen that day, and it was not even 9 a.m. before I realized that my entire world had just changed,
What really comes to me is this sense of flexibility. It's just this infinite amount of flexibility where these millennials can fit in so many different shoes, wear so many hats.
Adaptability.
This adaptability, yeah, exactly. This world that we live in does not match, even in the slightest, what we were raised to believe it would look like. Between technology, COVID, 9/11, as you talked about, and all of these different examples in between is, this isn't anything like what any of us thought it would look like. I mean, even look at the old movies. Does it look like anything like what the old movies said it was going to look
Where's
like?
Where's my hoverboard, Marty? Where is it?
Yeah. I think they finally have the self-tying shoes, but it's this infinite level of flexibility that these millennials have, and they really turn that into the meaningful work and this motivation to do better than the previous generations.
And not for any benefit of our own, but just because it's what should have already been done.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The other thing is millennials are incredibly educated. I mean, from generation to generation, if you look at the difference in education, I mean, again, nothing bad to say about like my parents or their generation when it comes to education.
Sure,
but they did not have access to the internet when they were at these ages where education is so important, when you can absorb all of this information and learn from it. They didn't have any of that. Whereas we're at these critical points in age between 10 and 20 years old, where we get given the gift of the internet, and the entire world landscape changes of what we can learn, and like what the delta is between their learning and our learning is so different.
Yeah, I'm just doing a quick Google search here real quick. I want to kind of see what the numbers of boomers versus millennials with a bachelor's degree is, because as much as we talk about having access to the internet, I think it even comes down to formal education where we may be, but I just want to double check
Yeah,
that.
I'm sure we'll say some outlandish things on this podcast and piss a bunch of people off, but that's why we'll have
Oh
have
darn.
our email up there so they can let me know all the mistakes that I make. But yeah, I appreciate you looking for a real source.
Okay, let's see. Boomer generation, some college, 21%, Gen X, 28%, millennials, 39%.
Wow. So even just formal education, like our parents, my parents, I'm sure you're set it the same way, is, we want to raise our kids in a better world than what we had. We want to set you all up for success. And I always make the joke of, well, now that they did that, now they hate us for it. But they're like, why was everything so easy for you? And it's like, wait, isn't this what you wanted? But yeah, I mean, 39%. That's a gigantic jump up.
Yeah, it's a 10% increase from the previous generation.
Not to mention that the level of education is just so much higher as well.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely gives me hope that as we rotate into political power and as we really we've already taken over the workforce. I think Gen Z is the ones who are starting to enter and increase in that workforce now. I think that it just gives me a lot of hope for, the future and the remaining, hopefully 50, 60 years of my life.
Yeah, I think we got a lot of work to do. So I just kind of recap because I like to put, a bow on everything as far as those characteristics of the millennials. What did we land on? Grit, accountability, empathy, and education.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you just think about those four words, and it's just how much influence, how much change can you bring about in a world when those are your four biggest strengths? Think about it just on an individual level, and then broadcast that across how many millions of millennials there are just in the United States.
With our little Gen Z brothers and sisters reminding us to take care of our mental health. We're running out of time, but I did want to ask you one last question, and I hope it's not too personal, but you're a father of three, and they're all this Gen Alpha, which I don't know anything that they talk about. It's all gibberish at this point. What would you hope for them? What do you hope are like the defining characteristics of their generation?
Man, this is something that my wife and I, obviously have spent some time on as we're kind of developing what worked as we were growing up and what didn't work and what do we want to pass along to our kids. And we want to take the things that have served us well and grow on that. And so I would say, number one, we got to keep this empathy train rolling. You know how big of a fan I am of empathy. You know how powerful I think it is as a tool and as a building piece to a better, community and a better society and a better world ultimately. And I think that everything that we hope to do in the future is empathy is the key. You can't do it. It's the cornerstone. So that's number one. If we can somehow keep that rolling, and I think Gen Z is doing a great job of doing that. But I think on top of the empathy, I want them to be able to be, this self-efficient and self-sufficient beings where they don't have to rely on other people and other things to get things done. And that's something that, my kids, and I don't know if I necessarily realized it as they were younger, but as they're kind of getting older here, 9, 10 years old, it's definitely something they've taken on more. And they don't, I don't know, again, my boomer people are not going to like this, but they don't come to me with questions about how to do XYZ. They go research it on their own, and then if it doesn't work for them, that's when they come see us.
And then you go and YouTube it or whatever.
Yeah, and then I do what I have to do to, find a better answer than what they had access to, right? So, just that real independent, thinking with an empathetic mind. And then I want them to have a world view. And what I mean by that is, as Americans, we get caught up in what's going on in America. We think that America is the only thing that matters, and the problems and the struggles that we see here are indicative of what's going on with the rest of the world, and that's simply not true. So I want them to have a better world view and be able to look at the problems that we experience in this country as not the end of the world like a lot of our predecessors would have you believe. Get out there and really see and experience what it's like for people in other parts of the world, and hopefully have a better global mindset to make the literal world a better place and not just their community, their state, and their country.
That sounds like a large hill to climb, but I'm very hopeful. They're really, really setting these kids up for success. And man, I would hope that if they are what you hope that they will become, that they'll take very good care of us when we're old and cranky.
Even at that point, it's like, I'm not too worried about it. I just want to make sure that they're in a good place to give their kids everything that they didn't get. And I don't know if there's a single damn thing that my kids ever have wanted or will want that they haven't gotten. Their boomer grandparents have kind of made sure of that. But just being in a place to be the best parents that they can be and the best influencers that they can be on the world that they have ahead of them, because I don't know that we've done a great job setting it up for them the best that we could have. So when you talk about this being a tall hill to climb, you're right, but the one that my kids are climbing and the one that this Gen Z is going to have to climb, we're all going to have to pitch in and do our part, because there's a lot of work to get done.
Yeah, amen to that. Well, with that being said, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Or?
No, I think we're good to go. It was a little scatterbrained. Hopefully, we get a little more organization as we go along here. And
man, I think we killed it.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on today. I'm sure we'll have you on soon. And I guess that'll wrap it up for this week's episode.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Unmentionables Cast, your weekly bite-sized dose of nonsense. If you liked the show, tell your friends. And if you didn't, well, recommend us to your adversaries and we'll torture them on your behalf. If you want to get in contact with us, send all questions, comments, concerns, issues, problems, and suggestions to theunmentionablescast@gmail.com. The show will always be free, but if you'd like to support us, you can do so at patreon.com/theunmentionables. Don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, thumbs up, or ring a bell to help pump up those juicy stats for us, and we'll catch you next week.